Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 321. A Fair Reward for Betrayal, Part 1. Immediately the voice was heard. A stark coldness appeared on the man's face. Slowly he turned, only to see a white-haired boy, looking to be in his teens, standing between him and Raven with hands folded. The man's eyes closed and twitched as he made out a sweet smile. "Ayaya, what is this? You didn't die." The man stated the obvious, slightly turning his head to Cal, who was the most shocked of them all. It made no sense to him that Northern was alive. He felt the way his blade slashed across Northern's neck. He saw the blood and his deduction. It was correct. With breaking, trembling eyes and voice, the despairing words rang out. "How? How did you do it?" Northern looked at Cal with contempt but averted his gaze with no response. Right now, he was insignificant and undeserving of his response. Not that he wouldn't give Cal his fair reward for deceiving him, but he had to deal with the bigger fish first. He rested his gaze calmly on the man. "I presume you are Sura?" Sura, with his eyes still closed, tilted his head to one side. "And whoever you are, I am uninterested. You stole my powers." Northern tilted his head a little bit and said, his tone dripping with mockery, "Oh? Are you holding a grudge because of a little thing I stole from you?" Sura stared at him for a while, his expression blank and unreadable. "Is this really the guy that smokes from a volcano? To me he looks gentle, sweet, and kind." Sura didn't look the part of all that Cal had said of him. Or maybe Cal was lying all along. Northern looked to Cal as he welcomed the notion. "I don't do well with thieves, you can ask Caladhel. He tried to steal my baby girl and now he has eternity to pay for it." "You," he breathed steadily, "you stole a portion of my powers. It was a parting gift to my brother. You bullied him and took it from him." Sura's voice grew fierce, mixed with anger and self-control. The moment he was done talking, he breathed in and out several times, then smiled at Northern again. "I will overlook it, okay? We can start afresh and find a likely path towards a shared goal. Because when we share a goal, we can comfortably share secrets, and when secrets are shared, true friendships are made. So, which means, a secret shared is a friendship made." He winked at the end of his words. Northern stared at him in disgust. A bitter taste was left in his mouth by those cringy words. He didn't know what to say to the strange man at first. Sura was not looking like how he had thought he would look. And for that reason, Northern was finding it quite difficult to move forward with any sort of conversation. However, he knew what he came here for and their reason for being in this gate. He looked towards Ulzard. He was unsure if they could pull it off, just he and Raven, but how would he know unless he tried? Sura followed his eyes and smiled. "Did you really believe all that Caladhel and my brother told you?" A frown creased Northern's brows. "Well, part of it is true, but did you actually believe? Seeing how Caladhel had failed to get you, that meant you didn't trust him, so it's kind of surprising you believed." Northern's frown only got darker. He didn't believe completely, but they made some sense, so yes, he believed to an extent. Moreover, he didn't want to believe anything that was coming from Sura's mouth, and something else bothered him. Right now, however, he didn't know how he would ask the question. So he decided to bury it. "Well, just whatever, what do you want to do now?" "I'm not going to let you take my daughter." Northern's face became horrid. He was silent for a couple of seconds. Then he sighed and said, "I guess we are off onto a dreadful start of our friendship." Sura laughed for a bit. "I like this one. He knows sarcasm." "Do I, though?" Northern cocked his head a little bit. But Sura's expression contorted with a frightful austerity. He said nothing and turned away, then flashed towards the sky in a wake of purple glittering lights, leaving Caladhel, who trembled and slowly walked back. Northern turned at him with a vicious light dancing in his eyes. Tell me, Cal, were you ever for us? Or when did you decide to betray us? Judging by the fact that he said, when I kill his brother. Northern looked away for a moment as he continued. He must have passed a message to you after then, which probably means your story was true, but you got an offer from him. I guess he promised you something, maybe a way home? That's what you want desperately. It's the only reason you could be so foolish for. Cal was speechless. His eyes trembled slightly, but overall, he was still managing to hold an arrogant composure as Northern confronted him. Raven was behind Northern, silently watching from behind, and particularly looking forward to what Northern's decision in this situation would be. Northern outstretched his hand, summoning Soul Taker. So you and I have scores to settle, don't we? Judging by the look in your eyes, you have prepared yourself for this much, right? Caladhel's eyes carried heaviness. Tired lines formed beneath them. His brows were furrowed, and a gloomy stare was emanating from his eyes. He slowly pulled out Stainless and extended her low. I'm sorry, North. Do not call my name, Northern yelled. He wasn't pained by the betrayal. He just hated the fact that he thought he could be wrong about Cal, even if it was for a moment. And he was glad Cal did this. He was glad Cal betrayed him. At least now his conscience wouldn't try to talk him into trusting anyone anymore. Northern raised his head and said to his opponent, Come at me with your best. Let's make this quick. Simultaneously, in his mind, he commanded, Equip name, Ignis Dominus. Your true name is Ignis Dominus. A ghastly blue flame covered Soul Taker, flowing like a cloak. Chapter 322. A Fair Reward for Betrayal Part 2. The air between both of them was held in suspense for a short while. Cal had a stern frown plastered to his face. What had happened, and he had his genuine reasons for doing what he did. As Northern had postulated, Sura had promised him a way home. Because when one entered the rift, they couldn't leave until the rift's core was destroyed. Sura for some reasons knew this was a rift and also knew where he came from. When Northern took Fano's name, he had instantly contacted Cal and demanded that Northern be killed quickly. He promised to create the gateway out of the rift and return Cal home. Cal, having lost all hope of defeating Sura, saw this as the perfect trade. Northern was strong, but he never believed Northern would be able to defeat Sura. Not now, not ever. Even if I was to die in this battle, Sura will still kill you and your partner. This rift will be the end of you. His voice sounded with so much surety. Northern tilted his head left then right, thinking a little bit about the words Cal had just said. Then his eyes fell on Cal with a sudden sweet smile. That's great. You have made up your mind to die. Cal's facial features tensed, his eyes darkly glaring at Northern. He lingered, then asked, Have you even ever killed a man before? Northern was silent, but his eyes were wrought with a vicious look, radiating an eerie blue light as Soul Taker danced with silks of fire. Had he ever killed a man before? The answer was no. He had never, and he never wanted to ever. Morally, Northern hated killing a fellow being. He thought of it as bad and the trespassing of morality. Drifters already are powerful enough as they are. Such power should be focused on extinguishing monsters and rifts, creating a better world to live in. Killing each other was just creating more problems for the world and reducing the number of drifters available to fight the rifts. There was no sense in that. However, when he thought of the necessary action of killing a human to protect what is his, or because letting the person go in that situation just didn't feel right, he felt nothing. It was like all his emotions had gone numb. Like he was empty and something in him was slowly disappearing. For this reason, Northern actually felt like a hypocrite towards Raven when they were about to start their journey. Because he told her off against killing someone, whereas it seemed like something he would do with no emotion. So far so good. Chaos and Void had done him a lot of good, but he did not know how long that was going to last. He didn't want to become an emotionless being. He didn't know what in him was going to change, and because of it he was kind of scared. Which is why he really didn't want to kill anyone. But this guy right here, Cal did not deserve to live. I'd rather fall into depravity than spare him. Northern gripped his sword tighter and fixed Cal a more vicious glare, his eyes burning with contempt. No response. Cal scoffed. I guess you have made up your mind. He joined his hand to the one holding Stainless, then closed his eyes. Slowly, the air around him began to boil, get thicker and somewhat had a foggy presence. Northern instantly knew something was coming. Something Cal had never used. Most likely it was what placed a sage on a different category from other drifters. They say their soul gained a personality, and it seemed Cal's soul personality was lightning. Northern knew which constellation was attributed to lightning, but had forgotten, and right now was not the time to think the likes of those things. Cal was probably about to unleash something devastating upon him. And he wanted him to, because who could be a better teacher of this new speed talent of his save the original owner of the talent itself. Lightning clapped around Cal as he moved his sword a little. One of his legs was slightly to the front while the other was bent back a little. He was in a strange stance, one that wouldn't give him the momentum he needed if he wanted to aim for a speed cut. However, his eyes were gleaming with a primal evil, one that made Northern realize that there was no backing down the moment Cal moved. He either cuts down the traitor or the traitor cuts him down. And he was not ready to die, not now, not anytime soon. Northern breathed in softly and breathed out again. He also had a card up his sleeve. He had received something marvelous from advancing his heritage to the next level. What better time to test it out than now? Remember the feel of chaos. Don't try to control it. Flow with it, he said internally to himself. With Formless, Northern found out he had gained that flexibility of flow. He just needed to imprint the feel into his muscles and never forget the memory. The first step to using the sword techniques he gained was chaos footwork. Hence, he moved his legs forward a little, brought his flaming sword to the front, and held it with both hands, his eyes locked on Cal. The tension in the air grew heavier. Everywhere became somewhat gloomy thanks to the atmosphere between both of them. Even Raven was silently anticipating. And without any warning whatsoever, Cal moved. And everything immediately stopped. In that slight 0.0001 second, Northern's chaos eyes revealed themselves, immediately seeing through the time stop. This was the true ability of the last skill that Cal had refused to use. While it was applicable in several ways subjective to the creativity of the user, this was the best overpowered use one could find for it. He would have won if he wasn't fighting Northern. Chapter 323. The Bitterness of Murder. Time literally stopped. Everyone and everything froze. That time stop, however, triggered Chaos Eyes, and the view of ligatures flowed effortlessly into Northern's visuals. Because of the time stop, Cal's physical presence was unseen. The whole point of Time Warp was to embed the user in the embrace of time itself, carrying them from one point to the other. While it might seem instantaneous or look the same as Shuinpa, it isn't. Shuinpa worked with the concept of defying distance, but in the end, it is limited to how far one can see. There is also a slight delay which can be caught by someone more experienced and sharp with battles. Time Warp, however, was a dangerous ability that took one's physical presence out of reality, pausing time to prevent an outside reaction, and dropping the person's presence wherever they willed it to be while resuming time after the deed is done. Which means no one should be conscious in this moment. Cal had no doubt that it would work. He was sure of his ability and had seen it play out several times among his foes. Although he wouldn't also deny that there was something about Northern that made him uncomfortable. Northern, immediately he saw the ligatures, didn't need to think. Chaos Eyes was in a moment of extreme procession, in collision with his slight mastery of the chaos footwork. Everything in that moment synchronized perfectly. And executed a muscle memory. Northern was led forward by the reflex of his own body, the reflex he never built or never thought to have. One that was of chaos. And the amazing thing was that, as he was about to use it, the information about the particular sword technique that would be executed flowed into his brain. It was as if Chaos Eyes was feeding it to him. This caused Northern to murmur the moment Cal disappeared. Chaos Art? Sub-form. Falling Star. Immediately, Northern exploded forth a downward strike that released a concentrated burst of energy upon impact with the air. In this case, the energy released was a burst of blue flames that consumed the entire air, entrapping him in a circle of flames. And the air that was hit was the time-masked Cal. Northern's strike had synchronized with the perfect time. Cal launched his own strike too, causing there to be a massive shockwave. But Northern, having known this was going to happen, instantly shot his sword forward for a counter. Chaos Art, second subform, Comet Fury. He unleashed a combo series of swift, precise thrusts that bombarded the stunned Cal from multiple angles. Disoriented and broken out of his ultimate ability, Cal was helpless and Northern was resolved. To gain any semblance of control, Cal knew the best option was to distance himself from Northern as fast as possible. The fact that he could even think straight in a pressuring situation like this proved he was a seasoned fighter. But he was too late, having forgotten that Northern now had his speed ability. Or rather, he underestimated Northern enough to not realize that his talent had been permanently copied. Unfortunately, when he realized it was his last breath drawn. In that moment that Cal lunged backwards was when Northern exploded forward with Velocity Dash, while using Chaos Sword Art. First form, third subform, Silent Requiem. Cal's eyes widened before he could recount anything. He saw it but he couldn't act because he was already in motion. Northern just happened to be in a faster motion than he was, ushering a deadly skill, one that was a simple thrust forward, swift and silent, entering into his gut with the tenderness of a knife softly entering into a peeled orange, squeezing out his crimson gore as the Soul Taker came out from his nape, and enveloping him in a dance of fiery blue flames. Cal tried to scream but his voice failed him. His mouth was agape with blood gaggling in his throat and pouring out. Eyes widened and blood drooling from the corner of his eyes. He stretched his hand forward to reach for Northern, but right in that moment Northern yanked the sword free from his neck, causing a froth of blood to gush out of his neck. Cal's body slumped to the ground, but the fire continued to dance and lick him. Northern watched as his blood formed a pool. Killing a man indeed left a bitterness in his mouth and heart. It was different from when he first killed a monster, even though both scenarios were a kill or be killed situation. His heart squirmed with irritation in that moment, however, in the next moment, his eyes widened with glee because of the notification that was brought to his face. Congratulations, you have slain a transient rank traverser of the underworld. You have gained 64 talent fragments for killing a sage. You have gained an item. The amount of talent fragments he gained caused his mouth to drop. An item too, he was really hoping it was what he thought it could be. However, he didn't have the time to revel in the experience. Raven walked up to him from behind and touched his shoulder. I know it doesn't feel good, but it was absolutely necessary. Northern's expression paled at her words. He looked back with a horrified face. Are you even 15? How would you even say that? What do you mean absolutely necessary? So, you'd find no issue doing it too? Raven shook her head with a small smile. No, I wouldn't. My first kill was when I was 7. I was thrown into a pit of black snakes which are the result of the talent ability of a man. My mission was to survive the snakes and kill the man in the pit. Northern's expression grew even paler. Just what is the Kageyama clan thinking? No wonder Shin hates them too. He sighed and shook his head a little. I don't even know what to say. He turned to the direction of the settlement, Marabeth. But we have a fight before us, don't we? Yes, we do, Raven responded and turned to Northern. It's an honor fighting with you. A small smile played out on Northern's lips. Then he nodded. It's an honor fighting with you too. Ah, I'm 17 by the way, not 15. Northern frowned at Raven's correction. So she's older? He scoffed at her. Sure, whatever. Practically, she wasn't, but he didn't want to think about that. He summoned a clone to pick up Ulzard, however. His eyes widened to realize the Boy King was not there anymore. Crap. I didn't see Sura take him. Raven also looked blankly at where Ulzard was supposed to be laying. She exhaled and said, well, whichever case. Northern nodded. Yeah. Since I plan to become a master before leaving this place, I don't intend on letting any of them go. Name, Northern Longguard. True name, Nameless, Superscript 3. Attributes, Formless, Spawn of Void, Limitless Void, Vestige of Chaos and Void, Chaos Eyes, Chaos Thread, Flames of Chaos. Soul Rank, Drifter. Void Summons, 6/100. Talent Fragments, 848/2000. Copied Talents, 2 halves. Own Talents, 1. Attribute Abilities, Active/Passive. September 10th. Owned Items, Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Silver Sword, Death Glare, and 6 others. Chapter 324. What are times? Northern and Raven stood before the river of lava. It was the only thing protecting the settlement of Red Walkers from them. Or them from the settlement of Red Walkers. Whichever one it was, aren't we about to find out soon? Even the said group of monsters seemed ready to face the inevitable. They lined themselves at the other edge of the river and anxiously waited for the 2 drifters to cross. Snarling and growling like hungry beasts, they were just like the White Walkers too. But they had red stony skin, fiery red eyes, their teeth were protruding out of their mouths like wild orcs, and their horns were a bit shorter than that of the White Walkers. But overall, they looked stronger, crazier, and packed more power in their stone-molded muscles. Some were even more pronounced than the others, with larger body builds and tiny cracks of lava running through their stony skin like veins. They held crude weapons, axes, spiked clubs, spears, unruly swords, shark-shaped and unhealthy for the timid mind. But Northern and Raven stood alone. Raven held 2 swords, Northern equally held 2 swords. Both of them fixed the horde of monsters with a cold, unwavering gaze. There was not a hint of fear on their expressions. Even though they were unevenly overwhelmed by numbers, they showed no sign of hesitation or remorse. Northern particularly hailed himself internally, because usually this many monsters would be causing him to choose to flee rather than to fight. Because the numbers were simply overwhelming, and he had always thought there was no shame in living to fight another day. But clearly now, he could see that perhaps he had been using that as an excuse for his cowardice, which was not expected of him. Having made up his mind to leave that old self in this rift and become someone better, someone stronger than anyone could imagine, not bound by the limits of ranks. He was more than determined to plunge his way through. If his life would be what he would give for such level of strength, then he was ready. If he really does die, then that means he didn't deserve to be strong. Northern made peace with that. But that would also mean that all his strength thus far had been luck. Now, that was what he wanted to check in this rift. Had it really been luck? Or did he work for it? If it had been luck, then how much more would he gain if he actually put in the effort? And if he did work for it, why did he leave that rift and suddenly become a coward and a fool? This battle for Northern was going to be a very long and deep moment of self-reflection. And he didn't want to get distracted. So he decided to summon just 2 clones and summon Lamla, commanding the monster to go find Ulzard. The 2 clones would serve as the extra hands. They would bring him clones from the side, which would cause his harvesting of talent fragments to be faster. He materialized the new item he got, and just as expected, a cleaner katana-like blade appeared in his hands. I would explore it later. For now, you take it. Northern gave it to one of his clones, and equipped the 2 daggers to the other one. He himself was armed with Soul Taker and Mortal Blade, his buddies from the beginning. He didn't know if he'd be able to part with them. First of all, he hadn't even explored half of the things Mortal Blade can do. And the soul damage Soul Taker dealt made a lot of things really easy for him. Northern smiled smugly and turned his head to Raven, who also seemed to be at the ready. "What?" she questioned, her tone dripping with a hint of arrogance. Northern looked away, trying his best to get rid of the delighted smile on his lips. He said as he did, "It's nothing. I was just reflecting on my first meeting with you. To think I hated you, and yet here we are. Leaving your back for me to protect as you do mine. Kid yourself not. I still don't trust you enough to do that." A cunning grin crawled up Raven's lips. She tilted her head with a red light glinting in her eyes, like that of a 1,000-year-old fox. "I think it's otherwise, though. I think you trust me, but you are just embarrassed to admit it." Northern rolled his eyes away. "Oh, please, will you just focus on the coming battle and make sure you survive? I'll take care of my own back." Raven nodded and tapped his shoulder. "Don't worry, friend. I've got you. With his face contorting with irritation, Northern retorted, Who the hell is your friend? Raven looked forward, her face breaking into a stern look of determination. She lingered, then said, still looking forward, I promise you, I'll get you out of this rift, and you won't have to suffer like you did the last time. On no occasion will I leave you alone to suffer. If someone will be trapped, then I'll make sure it is me and not you. Northern bowed his head as she spoke. His fist was tightly clenched and even clenching harder that they were trembling. He didn't understand. Who the hell is this girl? Why? Just when he was beginning to understand again, she just had to go and ruin everything. Who was she to say she'd never let him suffer? She'd sacrifice herself. Or what had she meant by if someone would be trapped? Then I'll make sure it's me and not you. The statement was making Northern's intestines boil with anger. Does she want to be a hero that badly? Did he ask for her help? Her sympathy? Raven, by the way, just stared at him with a blank expression on her face. She looked away, and then muttered audibly, I'm sorry for having built this way. All my life I have received a lot of hurt. My past, my childhood is so brutal that when I remember it, I puke. I shiver in fear. I'd never wish it for anyone. So, I'm sorry for being like this. Northern inhaled and exhaled, then wiped the anger off his face. He looked up with a straight expression and said, Let's just focus on what's in front of us, Raven. Which is right now killing as much monsters as... No, killing all these monsters. Chapter 325. A Broken Fella. Raven asked, How do you plan to cross? Do you want me to? Before she completed her statement, Northern vanished out of her sight and appeared instantaneously after the river of lava, right in front of the monsters. Her eyes widened, however creased into an amazed and awed smile the instant next. What was that? He didn't even walk. He has gotten even stronger. She seemed genuinely happy at Northern's strength. The shield appeared behind her back and immediately sprawled out its wings, carrying her into the air. Before she arrived, Northern had engaged in battle, unseen however. All Raven could see was a surge. There was usually a surge, then following it would be an upheaval of bodies that would flow into the air, spilling gore and entrails. He sped amidst them, using sonic surge to generate a burst of chaos flames that consumed everything in his path. All he was doing for the first instance was running, and running, which he had learned from Cal. Cal was a sage because of it. His soul had a personality which was lightning. He couldn't use sonic surge like Cal could, but then, in the heat of the moment, he thought, what if he just needed something to act as that soul personality that sages have? When one looked at it, it wasn't much, it was just the soul essence taking on a physical body. He thought of what he had that could fit into the description, and there was none other than chaos flames. The malevolent black flames that could even burn fire and wouldn't cease to burn until that which it burns ceased to exist. This caused a portion of the battlefield to be enveloped in dancing black flames. He was drenching everything in the sea of his chaos flames with sonic surge, not caring for which was which. And even as at that, Northern had not covered half of the battlefield. He was just at the very tip and had not entered into the main settlement, where the majority of the Red Walkers were situated, waiting eagerly to lunge into battle. They were so crowded that those behind could not rush forward but only waited for their turn to come. And Northern was plowing through with black flames from far in front. They were like a red sea, with a small black spear of flame severing the sea from the banks. If Raven was to estimate their numbers from an aerial view, they'd probably at least be 4,000. Although her estimation may seem exaggerated, she was sure they were in their thousands, and it wasn't just 1,000. Not to say, she looked forward. There was the grand palace, the evil spires reaching for the dark skies. From the open balcony of the grand palace was the man that she had seen earlier. He was seated on a very comfortable chair, leaned backward, a smoking pipe in his mouth. The spectral light wave that trailed the sky was ending right at the balcony. Raven decided to take a more keen look. Then her brows frowned in disbelief. That? The lights were coming directly from the smoking pipe that Sura had in his mouth. He was gazing down at them with a cold expression. His eyes were somewhat out of it. Unreadable, not even entertained. He was just there. as if bored. Raven for a moment was terrified. How does this make any sense? These lights go as far as the White Walkers region, which is over 100 kilometers. How is a smoke pipe even emitting light in the first place? Should it not be emitting smoke? Or are these lights actually colored smokes? Raven was confused, but she understood very well that there was a mystery to this surah, and that mystery left her seriously bothered. Deciding to ignore it for the time being, she dove into the battle. When she landed, there was a cataclysmic explosion of light. One that disintegrated everyone and everything in a radius of 3 kilometers. This caused a large hole to be in the sea of reds, and made the entire battlefield tremble tremendously, such that Northern had to pause for a moment and shake his head. Just a step into the battlefield and she had killed way more than he had. However, the unexpected happened at that moment. Do you want to copy talent Eros Luminous? EX? For 10,000 talent fragments. Northern's mouth dropped instantly. In the moment, however, he swung his hand sideways, lunging his sword into the monster that had its hands raised for an overhead attack, then yanked it free and slashed upwards in a spray of violet blood. What the hell? 10,000 talent fragments. It made him remember the one person who was also like this, the dude whose talent caused 5,000 talent fragments. Aside from the fact that his slot was full already, would he want to really dedicate working for 10,000 talent fragments just to come and copy her abilities? Just how powerful is she that her talent cost 10,000? And it was EX. Isn't that the highest talent class? Northern was twirling in more confusion with the passage of time. He spent brooding over how insanely expensive Raven's talents are. He was too broke for this. He couldn't, not now, not anytime soon. And it pained him to think that what he looked forward to was right in front of him and he wouldn't be able to grasp it. Not now, not soon. It was sad and painful. This girl is broken. She should be eradicated from the land of the living. 'Cause what the hell? Although he really wished to see more about the talent, he couldn't right now. He couldn't see through Raven's soul. So that made it incredibly hard. Moreover, there was still this battle. He spun and slashed off another monster's head. One clone was around him, obliterating those that approached while he was distracted with stilettos. The other was afar. He couldn't even see that one. And he also guessed that must have been the one that witnessed Raven's ability, since he didn't see it happen. Northern nodded and was about to continue the battle when he suddenly felt a throbbing pain stop him. He frowned and tried to walk, but his chest was tight. Mortal Blade and Soul Taker slipped away from his hand as he dropped to his knees. He tried to resist it, but it got even more painful. It was like his insides were in turmoil, fighting with each other. Suddenly the clone fighting around him disappeared. Then Northern saw. You have reached 2,000 talent fragments. Your soul is evolving. What? How? When? Chapter 326. Leave your back to me. Raven, after landing with the cataclysmic effect of her talent ability, immediately began to use her dual blade style. The Kageyama dual blade arts was a lineage art, one brought about by a heritage. That was the amazing thing about heritages. They could be passed down. It's not even a must for the successor to be related by blood. It was something that could be passed as long as the successor is a drifter. But most clans and families preferred to pass it down to their own blood. So one way or another, heroes past that had obtained amazing heritage had ended up creating diverse families with diverse lineage arts. The Kageyama clan was one of such. Their first patriarch was a great assassin with a dark element talent ability. It later formed their familiarity with the darkness. Their distinguished jet black hair was also something quite known to their family. And their talents, more importantly, were always a combat class talent. Raven, however, was the first person to awaken a mage class talent. It was strong, no doubt, but to her father and siblings it was useless. Being born of a maid, she faced far more cruelty and neglect in the household than any of her 13 siblings. Even at that, she didn't let the hurt eat her up. She wanted to make her father proud. She wanted to make him expect something from her. Every trial that her brothers and sisters gave to her in the means to kill her, she would always prevail, hoping that her father would look to her once, even if it was just only once. She trained like no other. Eventually, her natural talent spoke for itself, and she was able to use the lineage art just like everyone. She gained the heritage and its abilities too. And she trained hard day and night, days of sleeplessness, swinging the sword and forgetting that she has an EX class ability just because her family hated it. But that man didn't look at her at all. And when the academy principal discovered her talent, he approached her, convinced her to come to the academy. She ignored it. She didn't want to. None of her family clan had ever gone there. She didn't want to tatter the great family name. However, one day Raven decided against it. Of course, there was a catalyst to that decision. But for now, that remains in the box of mystery she herself had buried in her past. Ruffsberger's promise to make her the strongest has led to her being here. But honestly, she's probably in the 1% who doesn't believe his nonsense. She didn't trust another man to make her the strongest, but she did want to get away from her family. Just before she loses it and starts killing them randomly. She had to defy her father to leave, and the man made her a promise. Promise of death. She walked out of the clan knowing very well that they will come for her as they always do with anyone that leaves the clan. Which was why being in the continent of Stelia for Raven was a blessing. But she was also actively working to become stronger. Unlike Northern, she wasn't in a hurry to return to the Central Plains. In fact, she didn't seem to mind staying longer than necessary, seeing how she readily gave Northern the flying sheep as a reward for his help, when he would already be gaining plentifully from it. Her resolve was powerful and unbreakable and could be seen in the swing of her swords. The way they arched in the air, stabbed into those stony skins. There was no falter in her eyes, no waver in her heart. Her gaze was fixed and dangerous, her movements swift and sharp, her swords cruel and unforgiving. She was an abomination on this battlefield, a nemesis to these monsters. As Raven shot forward and plunged her sword onto the neck of one as it raised its sword to strike, Northern's clones disappeared, and she witnessed it happen. A frown creased upon her face immediately. Why would he suddenly make his clones disappear, Raven thought. Maybe he wanted to focus more on the battle. But then again, she thought about the unlikeliness of it. Northern very well knew that his clones were a great help to this battle. They needed the numbers to win this fast. She didn't think Northern would do something so reckless, at least not now. Worried, Raven equipped her shield and took flight into the air. Scanning for a couple of seconds, she eventually saw Northern on the ground, struggling to stand up while swinging his sword haphazardly to chase away monsters. A frown appeared on her face and she muttered in question, "Is his soul core advancing?" Her eyes widened in that moment, and without any hesitation, she dove in for the save, landing behind Northern and lashing out a vehement horizontal strike that sent blood spilling across the air, even besmirching her own face and armor. She glanced back at Northern and said, "Focus on yourself for now, and leave your back to me." Northern gritted his teeth in annoyance. Why did it have to play out like this? He had blurted to her not to mind his business and instead mind hers. Yet here he was, desperately in need of her help. Northern felt angry, but he also knew he had no choice. It wasn't like he had a say in this whole situation. The least he could do was not be a child and just accept it. He lowered his head and conceded. "Ah, fine. I'll be leaving my back to you." He rolled his eyes before eventually smiling as his consciousness dwindled before vanishing. As if suddenly fueled by those words, Raven felt an adrenaline rush course through her body. Every one of her muscles and limbs seemed unusually ready to protect him. Maybe it was because she understood that those words of his could very much mean he has accepted her. Maybe that was why she was so excited to fight for him, to protect him. Her eyes were even shining with excitement, with a sweet smile gracefully beautifying her face. Chapter 327, Road to World's Strongest. Your soul is evolving. Northern felt a hot, dark space envelop him. He couldn't feel his physical body, and it all felt like a dream. It wasn't as vivid as it had felt when he became a drifter. Perhaps that was why Nomad rank was considered a bridge rather than an actual rank. But this much evolution caused a lot of pain that Northern hated to deal with. He didn't think becoming a drifter caused this much pain. Felt like his entire self was burning. However, it didn't go on for long. Very soon, Northern began to feel extreme cold, which was better than the hotness. His entirety felt cold and calm, and soon it all settled. Everything settled so much that he could peacefully breathe. He exhaled a sigh as he saw the words pop out to his view. Congratulations! You have become a nomad. You are growing closer to the emptiness of void. Spawn of void has evolved to child of void. Attribute active ability Void Force has merged with limitless void to become a force of void that divides you from reality. Additional information. You are always in the limitless void but can choose who you directly interact with based on whom you tag as harmful or not harmful. Limitless void recognizes them as your threat based on your own instinctive judgment, and will generate a force of void around you that separates you from the reality of the threat in 1 microsecond. Additional information. Their attacks will never get to you because they have to pass through the limitless void to get to your presently manifested reality. You can either shorten the distance or lengthen it. You can even redirect the attack the moment it enters the void force of limitless void. Before even bothering to look at the rest of the panels, Northern froze on this one. This is sick. Broken, in fact. Of course, there was void force, but Northern had completely forgotten about it because of how stressful he thought it would be maintaining it while having to attack an opponent. The rush of onslaught, the in-battle decisions he had to make, and then he had thought what was the point in staying shielded all the time. And completely forgotten he had an overpowered defense ability like this. However, now it had gotten better, all because Void accepted him. It said so, but Northern was guessing this probably has to do with him killing Cal. Leaving that thought behind, Northern looked at Reed and thought about the ability very well. To put it simply, it was impossible for attacks to reach him because they would have to pass through Void first, since the Void is between his reality and the normal reality. It was definitely a complicated thing. Northern was feeling his head ache as he tried to put it into simple terms. But at the very least, he understood that he didn't have to consciously activate this attack. It responded to his instinctive judgment. So he knew he wouldn't have any issues with it. Moreover, it is now merged with limitless void, which meant it's there all the time. He sighed excitedly and continued to investigate the rest. New talent ability of your own talent has been unlocked. All your copied talents have been converted to own talents. New talent slots have been added. Northern couldn't lie. The moment the panels came before him, he felt an overwhelming rush of strength wash over his body. He couldn't put the feel to words, but he could vividly notice the slight changes that happened to his body due to the new rank of his soul. He even felt slightly taller than he was a couple of minutes ago. But that was not his main interest. Northern wanted to confirm a theory he had once proposed. Name, Northern Longguard. True name, Nameless, Superscript 3. Attributes. Formless, Child of Void, Limitless Void, Vestige of Chaos and Void, Chaos Eyes, Chaos Thread, Flames of Chaos. Soul Rank, Nomad, Void Summons, 6/100, Talent Fragments, 0/3000, Copied Talents, 0/3, Own Talents, 3, Attribute Abilities, Active/Passive. August 11th. Owned items. Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Silver Sword, Death Glare, and 6 others. Northern felt overwhelmed by emotions. He was correct. He was right. He now had 3 new talent slots and 3 owned talents. Moreover, he noticed something. He calmed himself down to check if it was as he was thinking it, summoning the panel for his own talents. Own Talent 3. Talent. Advanced Cloning. Class? Talent. True. Name. Me, myself, and I. Description. I am the only one. It is me, myself, and I. All others strengthen me. Talent ability. Self-clone. Other clone. Attributes. All the same. You can now view the information of attributes from copied talents. Talent progression. 0/600. Right, this went back to the beginning after Dark Terror merged with my Singularity clone. It was the reason why he could once again create multiple clones. Going through the information, Northern immediately sighted something and shouted, "Yes!" His voice echoed through the darkness. What did he see? It was none other than the one ability that had been added. He didn't even check the ability yet, but the fact that his talent ability increased meant one thing if he understood it well. Northern, when he progresses in soul rank, can also, like every other drifter, unlock his talent towards its true potential. That is, more abilities are unlocked as he progresses. Now, it's only one because he only had one own talent before now. He has 3 now, which means when he gets to his next rank, he'd be gaining more talent abilities for 3 talents including Soul Eyes and Windstride. There was nothing more exciting than knowing how much stronger he was bound to get. Nothing. There was nothing in this world that can stop him, and Northern was beginning to merge well with that understanding. He then decided to check the new ability. Other clone. Description. You can clone other things. The higher the soul rank of what you are trying to clone is, the harder it is to clone them and maintain their clone. Northern's jaw dropped. Crap. This is just crap. He didn't know what to say but crap. Chapter 328. Reborn. If Northern was seeing correctly, this would mean that he could clone not just himself but clone other things. He could clone items, clone maybe humans? He shook his head at the thought of that last one. No, it wouldn't be that strong. If not, that will just make me a broken individual like Raven. But even after clearing his mind on the agenda, he couldn't help but linger on it for a while, because it'd be overwhelming if he really could. There was no way to know except to test it out. Ah, damn. Northern suddenly looked around himself, bug-eyed. He had been in this place relishing his growth while Raven was desperately fighting and protecting him from a ton of monsters.
Smon Northern.
He screamed to himself internally, immediately recomposing himself. He stood still and steadily breathed, then closed his eyes, clenched his fist. He could feel a lot of nervousness flowing through him right now, and honestly, he couldn't even pinpoint the exact reason. Was it because he was so excited for himself? Or because he was thinking of what to do and how to do it? Should I just go simply with the flow or be the flow? Overwhelm everything. Northern thought. So far so good. Northern had been trying to, in his words, go with the flow. He had been trying his best to keep things to a minimal level without putting himself or his power out there. He wasn't hiding, he just wasn't showing it either, and that had led him to many discrepancies and inconsistencies in what even he would have expected. Night Terror definitely wouldn't have been proud if he saw how he lived his life. So Northern wanted to choose right. Firstly, he wanted to get his priorities straight. I still want to go home. I want to go to the Central Plain and meet my parents. But Helena was right. I have to focus on getting stronger now that I have the ample resources to. The moment I step into the Central Plain, I don't know what would be happening, who would be coming for me. Crap, I could even put my whole family in danger and fail to protect them, which is why I must focus on getting stronger. He sighed and nodded. Yes, let's make that our priority. Strength at all cost. I will become so strong, to protect my family, to protect myself and have a voice in the world. Not for some special reason, of course, but for the comfort of myself and those that I love. He gently placed his hand on his chest as he said those words. He was making sure they were ingrained in his heart. So, he wouldn't stray from this goal even when Northern opened his eyes afterwards, and when he did, he was reborn, eyes radiating with azure light and fiercely burning with overwhelming resolve. The aura of resolve that he exuded could literally drown a timid-minded person. He was different in an instant. Nothing about his physical presence had changed. But it was just amazing how much a person could be different just because they now have a purpose. Northern had finally found purpose, determination, and a reason. He was not sure how things would be going forward, but he was sure what he needed to do going forward. He sighed and blinked. Then his scenery changed. With that blink, Northern was back to reality. All around him was cleared, bodies of monsters lay strewn on the ground. A fiery lady shimmering with light moved like waves in a circle, and blood sprayed into the sky in praises of her movement. Raven was viciously laying waste to any monster that dared to enclose the opening she was creating while also destroying and pushing them further. She had done away with a massive amount of them, But the rest was not a number to be overlooked either. Northern breathed steadily and slowly stood up. He leaned on his knee and coughed a little bit before finally standing. The moment he coughed, Raven stopped in her tracks and swung her head backwards. A delighted smile adorned her face as she watched him straighten his back. She could feel it likewise. The difference in his presence. This was not just a situation of something had changed within him. It was like he had finally found that missing piece of himself. Most likely he had checked what he came here to check. Excited and happy, she turned away and lashed her sword downward, separating one monster into vertical halves with one of her blades. Northern sighed and looked at his hand. He was about to materialize his swords but suddenly paused and muttered, "No, there should be a much faster and easier way to do this." A small smile graced his lips as he thought about it. Then he turned his head slightly over his shoulder and said to Raven, "Why don't you give me a little space to take care of this?" Raven stopped and quickly jumped back. She had a slightly doubtful expression on her face. Of course, she knew he was different and all, he had become stronger and not that, his eyes were different. But still, he was only a nomad now, not even a master. Raven was not sure about just doing. "Don't worry, just fly here," Northern said solemnly with a smile. The sound of his tone, the surety that rang with him, made Raven's face freeze with surprise. A second later she nodded and muttered, Then she materialized her shield and took off into the sky, watching what Northern would do from above. Sura was also watching from the castle, muttering in pity. Leaving him to his death? Immediately Raven was out of the picture. All the monsters' focus fell on Northern. And without a waste of moment, they all dove towards him, with their weapons raised for a vehement kill. Northern stood there, feet grounded and head slightly bowed. Then he slowly raised his head and looked directly to the grand palace balcony. Sura suddenly shivered, feeling cold tingling as Northern's gaze shot directly at him from that distance. "What? You dare?" A vicious grin curled the corner of his lips. "Insolent human, I will personally see to it that you suffer in the volcano before you are slain," he said, gritting his teeth. His genteel face was overturned by fury, turned gloomy and dark. Northern meanwhile just stood there and spread both arms forward. Then silently said, "Black Flame." Chapter 329, Chaos Flames. The moment Northern called out, fire spread out like air. Slowly at first, but in the next second. Their pace picked up, surging forth like a tsunami of darkness, plunging through every crevice and engulfing all in their path. These weren't ordinary flames. They writhed and twisted like living shadows, devouring everything they touched with an insatiable hunger. The black flames spread over the already scorching landscape, turning red-hot lava into obsidian wherever they touched. Monsters caught in the dark inferno shrieked in terror and agony. Their cries echoed across the volcanic plain, only to be swallowed by the sinister crackling of the flames. No matter how they thrashed or fled, the black fire clung to them, refusing to extinguish until nothing remained but ash. The air grew thick with heat, different from the volcanic warmth. It was a cold, empty heat that seemed to suck the very life from the atmosphere. Sulfurous fumes mixed with the acrid scent of the dark flames, creating a choking miasma that spread even faster than the fire itself. Northern stood, transfixed by the terrifying beauty of the destruction he had unleashed. The black flames reflected in his wide eyes, turning the world around him into a nightmarish canvas of darkness and dying embers. This was the renewed version of Chaos Flame now that he had attained a new soul rank. And he knew for sure that, as long as his soul continues to evolve, his attributes would continue to grow more proficient with him. Chaos and void both. The thought of it excited him as he continued to watch. Raven was in the air, but she had to fly even higher to avoid being consumed by the heat of the black flame. She watched in awe from above. Even rock formations crumbled, not from heat, but from the very essence of their existence being consumed. She watched the dark fire continue its relentless advance, entering every corner, consuming everything in its path, even heading for the volcano. It became clear to Raven that this was no ordinary fire. It was a force of annihilation, a hunger given form, that would not cease until it had devoured every last scrap of life and matter in its path. Sura also seemed to have realized the same thing, as his face was broken in horror, eyes shaking. He had put away the smoking pipe from his mouth and was looking down with trembling lips. Everything he built, everything he fought for, all of it was being consumed in an instant. By an insignificant brat, a creature whose power should not even be able to hold a candle next to his. Sura froze for a moment. But what is that fire? It is so ominous. I have never seen anything like it. His eyes glared, then he vanquished the thought. Damn it all. I'll just kill him. He refocused his gaze to pinpoint where Northern was standing. He looked around but couldn't find anything. Then in a suddenness, Northern's eyes were right in front of his, a hair's breadth away. Looking for me? Eyes widening, Sura staggered back quickly, tripping over his chair and falling to a sitting position. Northern was crouched on the demarcation of the balcony, smiling. He then stepped down and leaned back on it. It was you, right, Sura? It was you. Sura was still stunned by how Northern had appeared so close to him and he didn't feel him. His gaze was stuck on Northern and mouth trembling in fear. Northern continued regardless. You were the one that lectured me about sword fight. I know that voice of yours. I've been thinking about it since the first time you appeared. Sura was still stunned, unable to pick up the broken parts of his terror-stricken expression. He just stared in dismay as Northern spoke. Northern looked down to the side of Sura's chair, where the smoking pipe in his hands had fallen. He picked it up and examined it with sole eyes. Item. Name. Pipe of Tehran lore. Type. Miscellaneous. Rank. Ancient. Order. 2. Description. This is a smoking pipe that was handcrafted from the cloth of the stars. Tehran lore gave this pipe to his lover on her pilgrimage since he knows she was an adept smoker. This pipe will help her find her way home to him always. Order ability. Pathfinder. Voice projection. Pathfinder. Exuding from this pipe is a spectral light of aurora. This light leads to Tehran lore. Voice projection. The user of this item can project their voice to a particular point using the transmission light of the aurora. Northern frowned slightly. It is quite the item. Then he looked at Sura, who seemed to have composed himself enough. His eyes were now fierce and frowning. Sura picked himself up and snatched the pipe from Northern's hands. He washed his face with his palm and let out an exasperated sigh. Then he pocketed the pipe into the large sleeve of his garb. You don't seem like a female, which means this item was not for you. Did you steal it and kill the real owner? Sura frowned darkly. Shut up. Northern smiled smugly. Looks like I hit the spot. His grin faded slowly, then turned to a grimace. What else again? Judging by how you are always smoking, you must be trying to find a way to somewhere? Where are you going? Sura looked at him. His facial expression was getting darker by the flow of the second. He folded his arms together and then coldly peered at Northern. Of course, Northern too immediately noticed it. The duration of stunning surprise that the revelation of his true power inflicted on Sura was over. But that was not it. He still had plenty more stunning surprises to give. And Sura probably would die from the surprise before they even engaged themselves in battle when Northern was done with him. You insignificant being. Sura's voice dripped with strong malice. You think yourself a threat to me? He scoffed. You are ignorant and foolish. Nothing. There is nothing for you here except for your own death. Northern's lips parted coldly. His eyes softened with the gentleness and tenderness of a calm sea. He tilted his head a little bit and said calmly, I look forward to dying, Sura. Chapter 330. The Dismay. Both of their eyes bore boorishly into each other's soul. Sura stood there, blank and unreadable, his gaze drenched with serenity. His eyes were a midnight shade of blue and were fixated on Northern. Northern also responded with the same level of serenity, only filled with more coldness. They seemed like vicious snakes, calmly assessing each other and could lunge at each other at any moment. Sura raised his head a little bit. Northern was still smiling solemnly at him, waiting for what the man was going to do. Finally, Sura's voice resounded. "You ungrateful bastard. After I taught you how to swing a sword, you intend to swing a sword against me." Northern's brows furrowed a little bit. Sura's statement made him uncomfortable, because he actually owed his growth greatly to the voice and had mentally prepared himself to make the voice his master. The slight discomfort he felt, however, only lasted a second after Sura said his next statement. "Instead, come to me, fight for me, raise and swing your sword for me. I shall make you stronger than you are." Northern tilted his head. It was an absurd offer Sura was making. So absurd that he just started chuckling, then laughing with trembling shoulders. After a while he stopped, hiding his expression within his palm. Northern then removed his palm with a very furious facial expression and said, "You just made me remember a very sad and painful memory, one that I had buried a long time ago. Of all things Northern would never do in this world, there was one that traumatized him. And the reason was none other than the mistake he had made before his death. He kept thinking about it in his earlier days of reincarnation. If I had not been a fool and kept following that girl around, doing her father's job just to please her despite knowing it went against my ethics and morals, would things have been any different? The sickness and betrayal, perhaps it was karma giving back to him what he gave to people. The cruelty that propagated because he accepted such a job. Working for the damned man without any complaint, all just wanting to please his wife. As long as she was okay with him, he was fine. When it was all a ploy to make use of him, as he was a one in a generational phenomenal engineering, best graduating student whose intellects and academic results even wowed the government. If he decided not to work there, he would have seen high-paying jobs anywhere he wanted to go. But he worked for her because of her. And what did that do to him? Never in his life, he had sworn to himself as a child, would he work for someone, swing his sword for someone, or fight for someone else. He will live only with his own best interest at heart and stand on top of everything. So when Sura made an offer like this, there was nothing much worse to tick him off than this. Now Northern was mad. Sura became wary, noticing the change in Northern's demeanor. He carefully observed, with slight body movements that showed that he was either readying himself for something or preparing something. "Did I ask you to teach me? Why the hell will I work for you? Swing my sword for you? Are you crazy? Have you no sense?" Northern's hoarse tone dropped harshly. Even his expression was fierce and cold, such that Sura had to wonder for a moment. What did I do? It was just an offer. He could just say no. But instead of speaking out, he stared at Northern with a puzzled expression. For someone as powerful as himself, he had suddenly become incredibly cautious of Northern due to the series of things that had happened, starting from the black flame that was currently eating his land. So he just stared and took all Northern said. Northern bore cold eyes into him once more, then raised his chin as he said, his tone dripping with malice, "You know what? Go yourself." Sura's facial features suddenly contorted in that moment. They became grim, brows burrowing deftly together, veins almost popping out of his temple. He glared at Northern and finally swung one hand forward with his finger pointed. "Begone, scoundrel!" Immediately, thousands of slender, needle-like ice spears surrounded Northern from all sides. Northern, unfazed, coldly assessed all of them. He inhaled deeply and exhaled. Closing his eyes for a moment, he wasn't even doing anything. The moment Sura raised his hand, Northern's attribute of soul eyes, sense had perceived the threat already. And with that, the void force of limitless void had been activated before the countdown of instantly. So Northern only looked forward to how this was going to work actually. These spears are woven with thin ice sheets, making them quite easy to freeze and shatter even space. Your defenses will be useless. Northern smiled. This is new. I've never met any enemies that gave me lectures of what their abilities could do. How about you show and don't tell? Northern's words infuriated Sura. He grimaced and flicked his finger. Instantly, the spears began shooting towards Northern from all sides and were shooting and shooting and shooting and never stopped shooting. Northern stood in the midst of clear air, It was easy to miss, but there was still a slight distance between the raining spears and Northern. He was clearly unharmed, even though the spears kept raining down on him. Sura was not wrong about them. Even as they moved with blinding speed, the air hummed and froze for a millisecond, but because the space was a self-healing fabric, the freeze was instantly healed. Of course, Sura's attack was supposed to take advantage of that instant moment before the self-regeneration of the space to break through even the ultimate defense. But all of it was useless before Northern. Watching his spears keep shooting forward but never hitting their target, Sura's face paled in dismay. His mouth fell. How? How? He asked. When they hit, they should shatter into smaller shards, causing additional damage and scattering dangerous fragments that destroy the body to smithereens. So how the hell are you not smithereens right now? Chapter 331. Fear and Hatred. Northern stood, folding his hands, clad in the vicious night terror armor. Every part of the air around him exuded primal terror, augmented by the essence of chaos to inflict misery and fear upon his opponents. No one was free from that overwhelming aura of his. As long as they felt the despair of the difference in strength, they would come to feel the presence of fear, one that emanated from the armor. Right now, Sura, who stood as the pinnacle of this rift, a creature to be reckoned with from the underworld, stood frozen in fear, trembling at the sight of the an ordinary nomad that stood before him. The boy stood still, not attacking but just looking with a downturned smile. Eventually, Sura discarded the spears, waving away the rest and shooting them towards the wall of his castle. They shattered into fragments, destroying the wall into even smaller pieces as Sura had said they would. So now he knew that nothing was wrong with his attack. The problem had to come from Northern. How was he able to block my spear attack? It made no sense to Sura because that attack froze space itself. If it didn't get through to Northern, then that means Northern's ability didn't conform to the reality of this space. It didn't even conform to this reality. Sura was looking down, thinking about it. The moment that line of thought entered his mind, his eyes widened. That's impossible. It can't be. Such an existence should never be allowed to roam free in this world. His eyes shook with intense fear as he raised them to look at Northern. Then, with a trembling voice, he asked, Are you a tyrant? Northern blinked. Something changed in his countenance. Finally, he muttered, then began walking closer to Sura, who instinctively took steps backward. Tyrant? What is a tyrant, Sura? Are you a tyrant too? Of course you can't possibly be one of them. Neither can I. We are just two insignificant beings. After the short smile, he seemed to have gained back his composure. He straightened up, exuding a more confident aura. Then he looked at Northern evenly and nodded. I accept. You took me by surprise and I underestimated you. But that will be the end of that. As long as I know now that you are not a tyrant, I have nothing to be afraid of. Northern squinted his eyes at Sura, moved his head back a little bit and said, You have nothing to fear? Not even the origins. Immediately, a tempestuous rage stormed in his eyes. His vehement displeasure at the word Northern uttered was evident all around his stance. Northern knew instantly he had struck a nerve, and that only pleased him more. His lips curled and chin rose. He scoffed a little. Which is it? Are you scared of them or do you hate them? Did they take something from you? Sura did not respond to him but instead just glared, consumed by rage. His current expression was a stark opposite of his usual visage before now. And Northern was enjoying the way this was turning out. He was enjoying the fact that he could poke at this being's emotions. Which origin was it? Tehran lore? Or his lover? Sura's furious countenance resonated with Northern's words. Yes, I hit the mark again. Northern was just randomly speaking the names he had observed in the information of the smoking pipe. And it did seem like one of those two had angered Sura. Now, Northern didn't think Sura was an origin or a tyrant. If he was any of the two, the rift would have been of higher rank. But he still thought that there was something significant about Sura that made him recognize what these two entities were and even hate one. And from the looks of the Guardian's reaction, Northern could tell he feared one and purely hated the other. He still couldn't evaluate which one was more dangerous from Sura's reaction, because he didn't know which one was mightier, to fear something or to hate it. Fear would make you cower. Hatred, however, would mask you with false reality, illusions that make you think you can stand a chance. That illusion clouded one's judgment and made them overestimate their capabilities. Of course, both emotions exist on a spectrum, and their effects can vary based on intensity and context. But the point of Northern's thought was that the origin which induced hatred in Sura was stronger, at least from Sura's reaction, than the tyrant which induced fear in him. Of course, anyone would think his thought pattern was careless and untrue. In terms of raw power, an entity that induces fear could be considered stronger because fear is a primal emotion often tied to immediate survival instincts, suggesting the entity poses a significant and recognizable threat. However, the hatred-inducing entity shouldn't be underestimated. The ability to inspire deep-seated, lasting negative emotions suggests a different kind of strength, perhaps more insidious or far-reaching in its impact. Which was why Northern felt, based on Sura's reaction, that the origin is a greater threat to Sura than the tyrant is. Of course, that didn't mean he dismissed the threat the tyrants posed based on Sura's reaction too. But he was currently just trying to draw out more information, as much as he could. Sura let out a deep, audible sigh, and then curled his lips into a delighted smile. "You snake, using coy tactics to pry information from me?" Northern raised a brow. He was shocked and surprised at Sura's sudden control over his emotions. It was sad. He really wanted to see more, think more, evaluate and come to a reasonable conclusion, at least something close. But the fun had ended. Northern shrugged and muttered, "It was fun while it lasted." Then he smiled sincerely at Sura. "Shall we end this, then?" Northern lifted one finger, his index finger, still smiling at Sura. But the air had suddenly changed, and Sura instantly felt it. He was furious, no doubt, but now he was becoming pale, reminded of the dismay he had felt a couple of minutes ago. "Here, have it back." Northern pointed the finger at him. In an overwhelming instant, all of Sura's spears came flying back at him from thin air. Chapter 332. The Truth, Part 1. Reacting with lightning reflexes, Sura raised his hands, shifting the spear's trajectories with a flick of his wrists. The glassy weapons veered off course, embedding themselves in the walls with thunderous impacts that disintegrated the wall. But Northern's assault did not end there. A black lance, like solid darkness, crackled into his hands. He narrowed his eyes to a slit and slid forward with little to no effort, piercing the air and reaching Sura in a jiffy. Taken aback, eyes widened, Sura staggered back yet again in a desperate attempt to save himself from the ominous black lance that Northern was now hurling towards him. He tripped clumsily and fell, causing Northern's black lance to sway over his head, cutting a few strands of hair. That was the initial look, but looking upon the area of impact once more, Sura was very lucky to have fallen just at the time that he did, because Northern had redirected the lance he was thrusting to a swing mid-motion, to take a perfect hit at Sura the moment he'd be running away. However, coincidence saved him. Northern clicked his tongue in disappointment. The inner workings of Sura's palace, however, everything was gone, severed with a clean cut from the black lance. The force of the cut was so sublime, indestructible and gentle, such that the upper part of the palace that was severed gently floated off like a cap blown away by the wind from a man's head. The fall, however, was what sang of the cruel and unfair power behind Northern's black lance, shaking the entire rift so powerfully that the skies seemed like they would fall. Sura touched his hair lightly and exhaled, since there didn't seem to be much damage there. But he looked at his palace and blinked a couple of times. He stood up and dusted his clothes, shaking his head a little bit. "Damn, I need to sober up." He glared at Northern. For long, both of them stood almost 5 feet apart, staring at each other. Northern had a blank expression on his face. He was neither smiling nor frowning. He even looked a little bit surprised, in fact. He didn't remember Black Lance having such a powerful impact. But then, Black Flame was also like that too, on a whole different level. Black Flame and Black Lance were both active abilities from Chaos Flames. It is possible that something had happened to Chaos Flames after his soul evolution. Either way, Northern couldn't care less, at least for now. They all worked to his favor. Looks like I will be able to end this faster than I thought I would, he said to himself, but loud enough for Sura to hear. You insolent fool. You affront me because I have been drunk and lenient with you so far. Northern rolled his eyes away. Then stop being lenient. I have so much to do. Do you realize if you kill me, you will be lost in this realm forever? Trapped with no way to your world. Northern cocked his head and let out a wry smile. Is that your way of begging for your life? He whined. Sura grimaced and shot both hands forward. Chains made of ethereal, glass-like ice extended from his hands. These chains can phase through solid objects, making them difficult to avoid or block. Sura once again boasted as the chains made their way for Northern. But sadly, they never got to him. They reached his front but still continued to be in motion like they had been directed into another space reality. Sura frowned in confusion. What is he? He understood not what was happening right now, and that fact alone placed more burden on his soul than the realization that he had not been in control of this battle since it began. Immediately, another chain shot towards Northern from behind. But the white-haired boy didn't even flinch, knowing full well it was coming. They met the same result, streaking towards him but never reaching. The result again caused Sura to open his mouth in shock. Pale shock. What? Did you think you'd be able to cow me with such parlor tricks? Sura gritted his teeth. I expected more from you with all I've heard, Sura. Come on, don't bore me out. I've not even started attacking you. Sura continued to grit his teeth. His gritting of teeth became even more pronounced. It was getting harder by the second to maintain a calm demeanor. He felt his grip on that thing called control slowly slip away. He was barely holding onto that thin thread and was a tad bit away from unleashing the turmoil of madness that dwelt within his soul. Still, he was doing a great job, seriously trying to hang on. Northern could tell he was struggling to maintain his cool. He breathed in and out and in, then sighed, bringing his face up to Northern with yet another pleasing smile. All right, I'll take you on more seriously now. This is getting irritating. Why is he holding it off? I don't understand. Is there something I am missing? Or maybe I can try to pry the information out of him. Northern looked a little bit forlorn for a while, then asked him, Why? The question caused Sura's demeanor to go deadpan for a second. Then he frowned. Why what? Don't you desire to kill me? Right now, shouldn't protecting this rift be your priority? Sura looked at him with distant eyes, then suddenly burst into laughter. His laugh proceeded for a couple of heartbeats before simmering down. Why? I bear no animosity towards you. I am only aggravated because you took what should have come back to me, and I don't even know how you do it. Kill you? Protect this rift. Sura chuckled once more. This is only but a place of exile for me. If you destroy it, I shall be free to return to the underworld and get my vengeance. He ended, folding his hand into a tight fist. Chapter 333. The Truth, Part 2. Again with the underworld. Northern had been noticing it for a while now. Underworld. What did it mean? But he refused to ask Sura, knowing very well it could ruin the progression of their conversation right now. Instead, he chose to confirm something else, lingering for a second before he asked, So, if this place was an exile for you, does it mean you alone were here from the beginning? Northern's eyes squinted as he awaited Sura's answer. Of course, I molded the Red Walkers from the volcano, as I did with the White Walkers from the Glacier Mountain. Distorted the concepts of this realm and made everyone believe Ulzard and Alana are needed for the rift to be defeated. Northern shook his head, his brows slowly furrowing as Sura continued. Well, how do I put this? Neither I nor Fano is the guardian of the realm. I killed the guardian a long time ago. Of course, it tried to make me its guardian naturally, but that was too much of a burden, so I created Ulzard and Alana, dividing the role amongst the two of them. He scratched the back of his neck with a small smile. The whole story of them going into the mountain is all lies I told to divert Fano's attention away from the fact that they are the guardian. Not him. Wait. Yes, Fano, I created him too, but I created him from my own blood. I created Ulzard and Alana from a mixture of my blood and the fabric of the sky. Northern paled. He was hearing some really unrealistic things. Who are you? Sura smiled and pointed to himself. Me? I'm just a wanderer who went astray with Tyrann's people. Well, in our world, the strong rule and the weak submit. As someone much greater than me, Tyrannn banished me for being a bad person. He seethed with anger towards the end of his speech. Northern stared blankly for long, then shook his head. I still understand nothing of what you speak. Sura massaged his chin for a couple of seconds before he then said to Northern, Young man, should we help each other? You owe me a debt after all. But, I observed that I keep starting off on the wrong foot with a lot of people and, I actually want to have friends that care about me. So I will write away your debt. In return, you can just give us a chance to work things out. He paused, observing Northern's demeanor before he continued. Since you look like you could use a little bit of my knowledge, how about I do that and you tell me how you took my powers from Fano? He paused abruptly and thought for a brief second. Then he refocused his gaze on Northern. Maybe I should just say it clean. Since we are friends, I'll be honest with you. He breathed. I want you to teach me how to do it too? Northern did not respond, instead looked at Sura for a while. He knew that it was practically impossible, but didn't know how to convey that idea to Sura so that it wouldn't look like he didn't want to sell out his secret. He sighed and said, Is everything as simple as having a technique to them? So you create these monsters with techniques that are teachable. Sura immediately retracted his head with a slight frown but quickly hid his expression behind a smile that beautified his face and said, No, my friend. That is not something that your kind should be curious about. Northern made a slight frown. Oh, so you are still discriminating? And you want to be friends? What? Discriminate? Me? Bah! He scoffed hard. I don't diss anyone, not to talk of criminate them. Northern felt like shrinking into the ground. Seriously, how much more cringe will this guy get? Trying to trick Sura was clearly working, but the guy had a very obvious mask over his trueness, one that Northern was not sure how to remove. And because of that mask, Northern couldn't trust him. Even if he does manage to remove the mask, Northern still couldn't trust. 'Cause who would? The bastard fed the entire rift lies for how Eldek knows how long. Northern just had to tread carefully, not make his intent known and manage to get out what he wanted from Sura without asking him. Learning it is a forbidden art, which is why I said it is not for your kind to be curious about, Sura explained to Northern with a calm tone. I see. What a coincidence, though. It's the same thing with my case. Sura narrowed his eyes at Northern as he continued. It's an art specific to the essence of my name. It's not teachable. It's just something I can do because of my name. Sura nodded in understanding with downturned lips. I can render any other help you want. In return, can you answer my question? Sura looked at him suspiciously for a couple of seconds, then eventually nodded, agreeing to Northern. What is the underworld? Is it the same place as Stuart? Sura stared with a deadpan look on his face, causing Northern to ask, tensed. What? Sura shrugged and said nonchalantly, I just thought you were going to ask me a more meaningful question since you were willing to be indebted to me. Northern frowned immediately. What? Indebted? When did I? Before he could end, Sura's voice interrupted as he explained. Underworld, it is simple. Underworld is the world under a world. In this case, however, the world under your own. Have you ever wondered what rifts are? Northern was still concerned about his initial statement, but his explanation needed to be paid attention to. He answered, I thought they are like a tear in space that swallows dimensions? Sura gave him a disappointed look. Tear in space? Swallow dimensions? What a lame explanation. Is that what people in your world think too? He shook his head and clicked his tongue. I pity you guys. You lots are far from the truth. When destructions begin to strike us both, I wonder if you all will be able to fare at all. He sighed and continued his main explanation. Well, your world is here at the top. He gestured with a hand in the air. Our world is here, a contrast opposite of yours, right below. He looked at Northern. Now, what do you think is in between, keeping both worlds apart? With a stoned expression, Northern slowly muttered, Rifts. Chapter 334. Bed of Lies. Well, not rifts, but at the same time rifts. No one knows what it is. But rifts started breaking into the surface world while destroying ours. So yes, that became problematic. But having so many powerful figures solve the issue on our part, and you guys are just so weak, keep venturing into rifts to get stronger. TSK, TSK. He shook his head, smacking his tongue. Northern was still thinking after Sura had spoken. Sura, on the other hand, watched him for a bit before adding, Stuart is a short word for Stuartal, the city of elves. Northern frowned and moved his head back a little in disbelief. Elves? As in long-eared, human-looking beings who can live for over 500 years. Sura cocked his head. Can't everyone live for over 500 years? Soul is very flexible with the control of essence. Anything can be done these days. Eh? Really? Sura shrugged proudly. Yes, I tell you, my friend. Northern was stunned for a minute. But he recollected himself and confirmed. So these elves fit my description. Yes, they do. And they are a lot to deal with. Caladhel that you killed was an elf guy from Stuartal. And I hear some even take shelter in your world. Northern grimaced a little bit. How? The rifts are easier to access from the underworld than from your world. But it's also doable from your world. If someone from the underworld enters the same world as your own, they could encounter and even leave the rift to your world. He sighed. Although that is forbidden. And currently, some inhabitants of the underworld are on bounty because of going to your world. It was that flexible? So there could be elves roaming around in the Central Plains? The thought of it made Northern's blood boil with excitement. Suddenly everything was getting interesting. He looked up to Sura's face, hesitating before he finally decided to ask. So what about tyrants and origins? Are they like the supreme deities of your world? Sura raised a corner of his lips. If tyrants and origins were in the underworld, there'd be no world left for us common folk to live in. No, they have a world of their own, tyrants do as origins do too. But our world is easily accessible to origins alone. I see. Northern's gaze was on the ground, completely out of focus. That's 2 debts, by the way. Sura's voice caused his head to swing up. What? He inquired harshly. Sura, however, was unbothered. He smiled and responded to Northern. You were only going to ask about Stuart and Underworld, but you ended up asking about the origins and tyrants. I figured if you wanted to know that badly, I would just add it as another debt. Northern's brows drifted subtly together. When did I ever say I was indebted to you? Sura pouted. You said you were going to help me, though? Help is not a debt. Sura stared at him, blinking with a pouted mouth. Northern felt like he was going to puke if he continued to watch a grown man that looked to be in his mid-20s, pouting and trying to act cute. He face-palmed himself and looked away. Forget it. He was trying to play Sura, but in the end, he was the one that got played. This guy is a fox. He sighed and looked at him. So what is it you want exactly? Immediately, Sura's expression radiated with bright light as a genuine smile came out of it. He then said giddily, Help me out of this rift. Northern raised a brow but listened. I can't destroy the core myself. If I do that, Tehran will notice and will immediately come for me. But if the rift is defeated by an outsider, it will shatter and I'll automatically be redirected to my world. It's a win-win situation for you and me. Northern squinted his eyes. Something still felt off, but he couldn't decipher what it was. He shoved the thought aside and asked, Your second debt is? Sura waved his hand with a small chuckle and said, Since we are friends, I'll write that off for you. Instead, just do this one thing for me. Northern nodded. He was silent for a while, ruminating over the things Sura had told him. Suddenly he realized something, a realization that caused him to frown, flash across to Sura, and grab his neck tightly. Sura was unfazed throughout, instead had his eyes closed with a twitching one-corner smile. "What is this? I thought we were friends." Northern clenched his teeth. He glowered. "Are you mad? You think I'm a fool? In order to make the rift defeat its core, I have to kill the Guardian, and if you made Ulzard and his sisters to be the guardians of the rift, you are telling me I'll have to kill 2 children to reveal the rift's core? Moreover, your story is fabled. Except you are an origin, I don't see how you'll be able to create thousands of monsters with soul cores." Sura shook his head. "You are a tough one to please, aren't you?" "I most definitely am, because this is all a bed of lies you are laying for me." "What is your true intention?" he inquired rudely, gripping Sura tighter. "Look, okay, I might have exaggerated a little bit, but I did create Ulzard and Alana and Fano too. Okay, I created those 3 for real." Northern narrowed his eyes at him, observing for a while. "I swear I'm not lying." He struggled to talk this time as Northern's grip was beginning to get in the way of his breathing. Sura tried to maintain his cool, but his forehead was already hot, and he was already sweating buckets. Northern finally let go and glared at him. Sura rubbed his neck, coughing out for a couple of beats before looking at Northern, who at that instant said, "Still, you are asking me to kill a child? You are not killing a child. You are killing my puppets. Don't give an overwhelming meaning to meaningless things and burden your soul unnecessarily. Ulzard is my puppet, as is Alana. I created them both using the core of the former Guardian. All you just need to do is kill them. Okay?" Chapter 335. Cruelty, Part 1. To use his own hands to slay someone he had taught and created a personal relationship with. How cruel can reality be? If Sura was telling the truth, then it'd really mean that Ulzard is indeed a puppet created to hold the core of the Rift's Guardian. He wasn't a real being. He wasn't even a human to begin with, yet Northern had bonded with him, had compassion for him, and one of the reasons he wanted to defeat this rift was to free the Boy King from whatever may be suffering him. However, now he has to come to terms with the reality that Ulzard is not real and just a puppet. It was truly unfair to him, who was already falling into a dark and empty depth. Whose game was it? Fate? Was he destined to go this path the moment he consumed chaos and void? Northern didn't believe in things like fate and destiny. Things happen because we do them. In every situation we find ourselves, we always have a choice. But even that lesson was one that he didn't stereotypically hold on to, that is, it was subjective to any change of ideas along the way. And so he wouldn't blame this cruelty on fate. He blamed it on himself. For going to form unnecessary bonds with a creature of the rift. For developing compassion and pity for a boy that would end with this arduous trial. It was his own fault. He had a choice, and that was what he chose. Now look what suffering it has caused him. The thought of killing Ulzard with his own hands anguished Northern. But he also was not ready to spend the rest of his life in a rift. He had a family to return to, he had a sister coming. He had a life to build, and he had a man to kill. All those things weighed more than the compassion he felt for this Boy King. So Northern once again had to make a decision. Sura clapped his hands together and smiled after observing Northern's face for a while, and seeing the subtle changes that reflected as Northern resolved himself to do the needful. Then he said, "I am impressed that you have control over your emotions. You are not fickle like other humans, who get unnecessarily attached and would do anything to save a soul rather than take it." The compliment sounded like he was just telling Northern in a veil of words, "You are a vicious existence." And that was exactly how Northern was perceiving himself right now. And sadly, he didn't mind. He didn't care. He was just a little hurt. The pain shall pass, and he shall be more careful in his future endeavors. Northern clicked his tongue in irritation at Sura and turned away. Then he jumped down to the barren ground, already riddled by the black flame. Just as he landed, Raven was coming with a young blue-skinned girl holding her hands. Corpse Eater was carrying Ulzard on its shoulder. Sura slowly floated down and watched in slight surprise as the monster placed Ulzard down, bowed down to Northern and stepped back a little. He stared at Northern from behind. Am I sure this guy does not have the seed of tyranny in him? How can he control a monster? It made no sense to Sura, but his thoughts were also far-fetched, which caused him to shake his head and say further, inwardly, it can't be. The seed of tyranny was destroyed by Ghost Blade. No, he can't have it. Sura's gaze still rested on Northern's back, who was conversing with his partner. Raven asked, why is he still alive? I figured you'd have ended it ages ago. I would have, but he begged for his life. Hearing that, Sura immediately shouted, hey! Northern looked back with a strained stare. What? Seeing his expression, Sura withdrew a little and said silently, you don't have to portray me as such in front of a beautiful lady. Give me some dignity at least. Northern ignored him and turned to Raven. He looked at the young girl holding her hands. Alana was just like Ulzard, except that her tresses were longer. She had sharp eyes that seemed insightful even. She looked at Northern and turned away with no emotion in her eyes. Raven glanced at her and said to Northern, I tried communicating with her. She wouldn't say anything, and I caught her hiding beneath a rock. Northern frowned a little. Hiding? What was she hiding from? I don't know. I tried to question her about it, but she didn't make a sound. Well, given the commotion, she could have wanted to safeguard herself. She's a much more fragile child after all, Sura intercepted. He looked at Raven and turned his eyes to the girl, washing away a subtle furrow on his brows before saying to Northern, will you do it now? Northern's countenance winced with confusion. Noticing the look on his face, Raven immediately asked, do what? Northern looked at her and exhaled. Then he said to her, come, let's step away a little. He directed Raven away from Sura where they stood and talked. Northern explained everything Sura had said to him and then awaited her reply. Even for Raven, whom he had presumed would react coldly towards it, that seemed like a cruel thing to do. He could tell by how conflicted her demeanor was. She raised her head up to him, however, and said, we can't really predict the ways of the gate. I'd say we kill Sura first, then kill both of them if we find out that indeed the Rift Core did not show after killing him. Because he could be telling lies just to protect himself. Northern thought about what she said, but somehow he felt like killing Sura is a waste. His eyes were focused on the ground for a while before he looked up and replied to Raven. Here's what I think. I don't think Sura would have been lying about the involvement of these two. Of course, I also do not think he is saying the complete truth too. In fact, I don't even know which one to filter out as truth, but I sincerely feel like killing him would be a waste. Because of the underworld? Northern nodded. What exactly are you planning? Northern breathed in and said, the only way to know if Sura is indeed saying right about the underworld would be killing these two. If he indeed returns, then that will mean all I have heard from him is truth. If he does not and has tricked me. His gaze went cold. Well, there's nothing there. I can just kill him whenever I like. Easily. Chapter 336. Cruelty, Part 2. Raven looked at him with a pure serenity smile. Her face lit with brilliant radiance. Those red eyes of hers could captivate even the hardest of stones. But not Northern. She nodded and said to him, I like your confidence. Where has it been all this while? She paused and threw a long blank gaze towards Sura. But I'll remind you that we are dealing with a strange being right now. What exactly is your plan? Before Northern had the chance to respond, she pressed on, looking at the young children that were being guarded by Lamla right beside Sura. Are you even ready to kill someone you taught? The question caused a tight sensation in Northern's chest. He was restraining himself from holding his chest and trying his best to maintain his cool regarding the situation. He exhaled and calmed his entire demeanor, such that Raven was shocked with the sudden air of calmness around him. It's fine. I'll manage somehow. As for what my plan is, was what he said as he went back. Raven stared at Northern's back with a worried face, noticing belatedly that he had gotten slightly taller than he used to be. Have we been here long? She asked herself. Northern got to where Ulzard was laid, picked the boy up and gave Sura a frightening glare. contorting all his lines in a grim manner. He then said, "You better not be lying to me. Killing you will be the start of your suffering. And trust me, I can make you suffer even after death." He walked away with the boy king in his arms, soon disappearing towards the volcanic mountain, shrouded by the dark mist caused by the after effect of the black flame. Sura smiled and turned to Raven, who was now walking towards him with a vicious crimson light reflecting in her eyes. She stopped in front of him, said nothing, and just stayed there like a statue. After a couple of awkward minutes for Sura in particular, he made some awful attempts to talk to her. But she responded to none of it. After a while, he got tired of trying and gave up, waiting for Northern's return. Meanwhile, Northern got to the base of the volcano. The heat in this region was searing. It seemed like a second skin that was melting into the lower layers of his own skin. The Night Terror armor seemed to make it more difficult to endure. Northern had discovered that the armor did well against cold but was very weak towards heat. Aside from that fact, he didn't think there was any other weakness to it. Of course, with Limitless Void's defense, now he wouldn't have to worry about getting attacked. Practically nothing can get through to him. But he essentially also understood that there are attacks that can bypass his sense, as well as attacks that his instincts could react lately to. So he did well to humble himself in a situation like this, and yearn only to be stronger. After sighting a small boulder of stone, Northern laid Ulzard there in a sitting position. It was amazing how the ground and rocks themselves were not hot despite the heat of the volcano. If anything, they seemed cold. It reminded Northern of what Raven said the glacier mountain behind the ice palace had felt like. Hot instead of cold. Maybe it's a property of the rift themselves. Northern tried to wake Ulzard a couple of times, tapping his exposed arm as he was shirtless. After a couple of taps, the boy slowly opened his eyes, groaning a little. He muttered, "Teacher." Northern felt his heart throb the moment those words came out. The boy was still slightly asleep. Whatever the drug that Caladhel used on him was, it must have been incredibly strong, because Ulzard had literally slept throughout this event. He was awake now, however, and was undoubtedly glad to find himself with his teacher. Northern allowed a melancholy smile and patted the young boy's head as his words came out with a sharp tingling sensation in his throat. "If you had the chance to be reborn, I would want you to hate me, resent me, and seek nothing but my destruction. At least I would feel less bad knowing that you cannot forgive me." He smiled wistfully once again. The young boy, on the other hand, seemed lost. He didn't understand what Northern was saying. Not that he didn't know the words, he just didn't get why those words were coming at a time like this. Before he could speak, however, crimson blood dripped down his mouth. He tried to speak nonetheless, but gurgled, opening his mouth with a widened and paled face. His hands grabbed the dagger that had been silently embedded in his chest, trying to pull them out. But Northern was holding them into his chest with a much stronger force. Then he sluggishly stretched his hand forward, only to smear Northern's face with his blood as he crumbled to the ground. Northern looked up to the dark sky, feeling a cold tingling sensation on his cheeks as tears streamed down his face. Once again, he felt something drift far away from him. His eyes became dark, and it looked like some flame of brightness barely maintaining the light in his soul had been extinguished. The chaos and void in him was relentless, taking everything that made him human and turning him to who knows what. But Northern in that moment was not sure what the future held for him, but he made a vow to himself. As long as he continued to live and breathe the air of this world, his sole purpose shall be the extinguishing of rifts and all the masterminds behind it. Be it the gods he met from the beginning, the tyrants, or the origins. Hell, he didn't even care if it's all. "I will stop at nothing. I will inflict suffering upon them, one that their soul wouldn't be able to bear. They will cower and beg me with their heads on the ground. I will destroy them, all of them." Northern gritted his teeth as he spoke. His eyes formed with a frightening resolve, cold, at the same time burning viciously in his eyes. This resolve of his wasn't just about what had transpired with Ulzard. Starting from the nonsense Ruffsburg pulled, the viciousness of the rift, even outside of it, was no better. Everywhere, Everyone was leading a life towards ruin, and right now, it was beginning to piss Northern off seriously. Chapter 337. Outsmarted. Northern slowly approached the trio, with a whitish orb in his hands. His face was stained with blood and emotionless. He stopped in front of Raven, who cast an indifferent gaze on him, stared at the core in his hand, then materialized her sword. With a quick movement of her hand, Raven's sword flashed and returned to where it was. The small girl standing behind her slowly crumbled to her knees, a thin line appearing on her neck. As she fell, her head completely rolled away from her neck. Northern's face paled as he watched Raven decapitate a young girl without even a slight show of emotion. Just how much of a cold-blooded killer was she? But he said nothing and just ground his teeth behind pursed lips. Raven bent down, plunged her hands into the girl's chest, and pulled out another whitish orb, her hand covered in blood. Northern then turned to Sura. He wouldn't lie. In this moment he felt a lot of mixed emotions, and carefully tried to navigate peace through all of them. One single thing kept him in anticipation. If Sura should betray them, if Sura ended up lying after all. The thought was like a pest that incessantly ate at Northern's mind. He was patiently awaiting for just that to happen, because he never trusted Sura from the onset. All he did was just a gamble. Even if they were puppets as Sura called them, it still didn't feel human to gamble with the life of the boy king. Someone he had closely tutored, someone that looked up to him for salvation. It tore Northern's heart to shreds even in this moment, which was why Northern knew he wouldn't hesitate to turn Sura to shreds should he try nonsense. What next? I don't see the rift core revealing itself. His voice sounded with a strong and threatening tone. Anyone would shiver with how intimidating and cold he sounded. But Sura maintained 100% composure. He smiled delightfully as usual and looked at the cores in their hands. It's right there, my friend. In your hand. Northern raised a brow and looked at him. Immediately Sura extended both hands. Bring the cores, he said. With a contemplative look on his face, Northern collected the core in Raven's hand, then placed both on Sura's. He smiled at them and nodded, then began to bring the cores closer to each other but slowly. Immediately they touched. A bright white light emanated from both of them and continued to shine even more brightly until they were fully fused. As the brightness slowly dimmed, Northern saw the panels appear with its usual monotonous voice in his ears. You have identified the soul core of the rift without killing its guardian. Northern's brows immediately furrowed. In the same instance, a wide grin spread across Sura's face. Northern in that moment, seeing the grin as it spread on Sura's lips, felt an electrocuting sensation travel through his entire body. Bastard! He reacted without a sense of control, leaping towards Sura like a spring. How naive! Sura said with a vicious grin and muttered, Frostbite reflection. A protective layer of transparent, reflective ice shimmered around him, spreading across the air quickly before Northern could reach him with a black lance that had already materialized. Eventually, the black lance lunged forward, lashing a ferocious and ground-shattering attack at the layer, but was instantly reflected and shot back at Northern. Casually, the attack disappeared when it got closer to him. Sura was now encased in a layer of defense that not even the black lance and probably the black flame could pierce. One that even reflected attacks. However, his face paled when he realized something. The core in his hands. Something did not feel right, and he was only just noticing it right now. Immediately Raven stepped forward and smiled, bringing out another whitish orb and handing it to Northern, who also was handed another core by his clone that just appeared. Sura frowned from where he stood watching Northern and the two cores in his hands. What is this? What is going on? They had handed him fake cores? No, that wasn't it. Fake cores would never merge together like these ones did. Even if it was for a minute, he sensed the originality of these orbs. What went wrong? At what point did they change it? Was it when he launched the attack? Did he do something? Northern curled a corner of his lips in a smug smile and shook his head. You look so confused. It's quite a sight. I wish I could capture it forever. Sura's frown intensified. What did you do? Well, I will tell you, Northern breathed. It's simple, I just couldn't bring myself to trust you no matter what. So I decided to clone the orb I gave you. I also cloned the one Raven extended to me and collected it from her hand, leaving the original to her. Before getting here, I'd given my clone the one with me to hold. And thus here we are. That was the plan he had told Raven before walking away from her. Northern's smile was drenched in satisfaction. Turns out I was right not to trust you. I couldn't be happier. So you are the guardian of this rift after all. Sura sighed and face-palmed himself. Of course I'm not. Do you think I'll be able to do what I did with those cores if I was? Northern's face immediately became grim the moment a realization struck him. His mind went to the one person that was alive right now. Fano? Sura smiled sweetly. I altered his memories and bloodline with mine after defeating him. I gave him a family, I gave him a reason. So, he is very convinced that I am his brother and we live to protect the kingdom of fire and ice together. Northern shook his head in disgust, then closed his eyes for a moment. A second later the entire rift shook, and the orbs began to float on their own, glowing with white light as they came closer to each other. Sura, seeing what was happening, was immediately terrified. All the composure he had before now started to fall apart. What did you do? Northern cocked his head. What else? I killed the guardian of the rift. I figured I probably wouldn't be able to force reveal the true form of the rift's core like you tried to, but since I knew the guardian, I could just kill him. So, I ordered my subordinates to do it. Of course, he didn't forget that Pangu Kal had been with Fano all along. Sura shuddered and crumbled to his knees as the cores merged and finally revealed a slightly larger core. He stared at Northern with trembling eyes. What have you done? Horrified, his voice shook. Chapter 338. Out of the Rift. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead as his facial features broke down in horror. His hands trembled and his eyes were widened like they had seen a mighty terror. This was the first time Northern was seeing this kind of expression on Sura's face. He wasn't even this scared when he made mention of the tyrant from before. You have no idea what you have done, he shouted at Northern, who in response did not really care. All that went about Northern's mind was that he had the rift core in his hand. Finally, they could get out. He was also very happy that he didn't seem to have spent so long compared to the last time he was in a rift. He looked at the core in his hand for a couple of seconds and raised his head to Sura, who refused to undo his frostbite reflection but was trembling seriously. That reflective defense was the only thing stopping Northern from getting him. And Northern wanted to get him so badly. Raven took a step closer to him and placed her hands on his arm. Let's get out of here. Northern turned his head to her and gave a small smile. Then he returned his gaze to Sura and said, Goodbye, Sura. He crushed the core with his hands. Congratulations. You have destroyed the rift's core. You have accomplished some incredible feats. You alone decimated over 3,000 monsters of the rift. What an outstanding feat that is. You defeated a creature of the underworld. Your effort will not go unnoticed. Your soul evolved. The furnace of forge grows ever stronger in your soul, forging the chaos and void into oneness with you. You shall gain talent fragments for these points. You have gained plus 100 talent fragments. You have gained plus 150 talent fragments. You have gained plus 200 talent fragments. As the panels displayed themselves before his eyes, Sura's scream almost blinded his ears. He shouted and groaned like a madman, eventually started to curse at Northern. You vermin! You dare deceive me! I will find you! If it takes me 1,000 years, I will find you and find all shades of you that there is. I will kill you and kill everyone related to you. I'll make them suffer and beg for their death. You insolence! I will never forgive you! His body broke apart as he shouted, white light leaking out from within. Eventually, the light began to force itself out more, breaking apart his body as he shouted, Please! Please! Save me! He will find me. I can't meet him like this. I am not ready. I will suffer. Sura shouted as he disintegrated into sparkles of light. Through it all, Northern stared at him with a cold look on his face. After Sura had finally disappeared, Northern worried a little about his plea in the end. He would suffer, he was not ready, he can't meet him like this. Was it Tehran or was it a tyrant? Northern didn't know which one it was. At least this event further reinforces the need for him to get stronger. Because one day, he might have to face them. And if they are the mastermind of these rifts, Northern sighed, I won't spare any of them. The rift trembled tremendously. It couldn't hold out anymore since its core had been destroyed. Northern, I guess it's time for us to leave, Raven said to him from behind. Then she turned her head backward. There was a whirling pool of soul essence with a whitish appearance behind them. Definitely that was the way out of the rift. Northern looked at the rewards he had received from the rift. They were a lot, and he never expected that talent fragments could be gifted for free like that. If there's any place I should have received a lot of talent fragments as rewards, it would have been that damned Redmine Kingdom. Only drifter rank and above can reap feat rewards. Since your soul was still incomplete as a walker, you couldn't… Northern nodded. He cited the rest of the notification panel. Rift has been swallowed by limitless void. The area of limitless void has grown. Some new features have been unlocked for the limitless void. Make sure to explore them later. Northern glanced at the dead girl and looked in the direction where he had thrown Ulzard's body into the river of lava. Then he turned back with a heavy heart and walked towards the portal. Corpse Eater and Kal had long returned to the embrace of his void. So he walked alone with Raven and entered into the portal, coming out in the swampy forest. Suddenly, a loud and thunderous tremor shook the entire scape such that Raven and Northern almost faltered their step. Raven frowned and looked at Northern, whose brows were also getting furrowed. Sense had gotten better since his soul evolved, so he could immediately tell. All the monsters in the forest are rampaging. I don't know. It's like something is waking up. The frown on Raven's face suddenly got dark. Her eyes narrowed into a stormy gray as she fixed an intense, displeased glare straight ahead. You know something, don't you? A drop of sweat trickled down Raven's forehead. When I was making plans for this journey through investigating the Lord of Lothaliwen's diary, there was one little bargain that I made. Northern looked at her. He had a very bad feeling about what was about to come out of her mouth. In fact, he'd have wished for her to stop, but unfortunately he had to know. At least she was being straight honest even outside the rift. She continued, if the bargain was to fail, I was sure that we all would die. None of us could make it back. Northern raised his chin a little. He wasn't even surprised anymore at how thoughtless, careless, and ignorant she could be. You bargained with my life without even informing me? Northern growled at her. You collected all the soul cores. I think that's enough payment for jeopardizing your life. Besides, it's not like you didn't know that every fight with a monster is your life being bargained. Yeah? But this is with a monster you can't beat. None of us can beat, right? Raven looked away with a frown, then looked back. Maybe before. But now, I'm sure we can survive. Chapter 339. An Unsightly Sight. Northern was silent for a couple of seconds. Well, she's practically right, although I don't even know what the monster is. Whatever it is that is causing all the monsters in this depth to rampage must be something very strong. Still, he didn't see himself dying to anything. Not now, not any time at all. And the ship? We'd have to fly back to the surface. Northern looked around. The hill he had made. How long has it been anyways? Looks like a couple of months have passed. We did lose track of time at a point, besides we can't be too sure. Not every rift has the same time flow with the outside. She looked out of focus for a beat and came back. Anyways, we have to go to the surface. She extended her hand to Northern, who in response staggered back with pale disgust. What? Let me be your ride? An awkward, devilish grin formed on her face. She relished this moment. What? It's nice to see you are making jokes which you suck at, but wipe that hideous smile off your face. Immediately, Raven straightened her expression. The awkwardness on her features vanished like it was never there. She had only decided to try it out, the joke, but now she was very embarrassed at herself. She turned away slightly, cheeks reddening. Northern stood with one squinted eye. Things were descending into a depth of chaotic awkwardness. He needed to do something before it got worse. I guess there's no choice. I don't think you'll let me have the shield and carry you instead. Raven looked back at him and grimaced. Thankfully, that made her usual self come back. I thought so too. Then I guess I have no choice but to let you carry me. Right now, Northern didn't have any monster capable of flight. Call was the closest to one, but he had a great jump force, not flight. Also, he didn't know right now how to best utilize his repertoire of abilities to create flight out of them. He also didn't think there'd be a way. So he had to rely on Raven for now. Raven smiled and summoned the shield to her back. As it sparkled into existence, black lustreless wings, spanning over 5 meters, spread out from her back. She slowly levitated and extended her hand for Northern to take. Gentlemanly, he took it and went up with her. It was a bit rocky for her to manage pulling him at first. The wings themselves seemed to even have felt the weight. But it got better as they steadily flew up. Eventually, they landed on the surface Raven had left from. She bent on her knee and breathed heavily for a while. That was how exhausting it was to pull Northern up all the way to the surface level. A depth of probably over 20 feet. Northern, however, stood up, then looked forward. His eyes, they froze at the sight that he beheld. What is this? Raven, quickly noticing the trembling in his voice, stood upright and immediately scowled as she saw what he was looking at. What could have done this? The scene before them was one of unparalleled gruesomeness and primal ferocity. A tableau of disaster and bloodshed that defied comprehension. The ground appeared as if it had been violently upheaved, scarred by the savage conflict that had raged upon it. Corpses of fallen creatures, twisted and broken, littered the landscape in an unending sea of death. Their blood, thick and dark, pooled into an ever-growing river that wound its way through the chaos, spilling into deep craters that marred the once stable earth. These pits, like gaping wounds in the terrain, were filled with the crimson lifeblood of countless beings, creating a macabre tableau that churned Northern's stomach and stilled his breath. The air was heavy with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood, a suffocating note of the sheer scale of the carnage that had unfolded. The sight alone was enough to invoke a deep-seated terror, a primal fear that gnawed at the soul. It was a place where the very essence of life had been extinguished in a brutal display of unrelenting savagery. The echoes of the conflict seemed to linger, whispering eerie tales of unimaginable brutality and suffering. As Northern and Raven continued to stare upon the scene, a chilling realization settled in. A sense of dread of the one creature that could have done this to its kin. Suddenly Northern felt a wave of nausea surge through his body. His stomach twisted into knots, rebelling against the grotesque sight. He suddenly felt an uncontrollable urge rising from the pit of his abdomen, a churning that clawed its way up his throat. Desperately, Northern turned away from the sight and clutched at his stomach, doubling over as his body heaved. A sour taste filled his mouth, followed by a burning sensation that seared his esophagus. With a violent spasm, he retched, his muscles contracting involuntarily. The contents of his stomach erupted forth, splattering onto the ground with a wet, sickening splash. He gasped for breath, his body racked with convulsions. Each heave was more forceful than the last, leaving him weak and trembling. His throat burned, and his eyes watered as the acrid bile forced its way out. He could feel the cold sweat beating on his forehead, his pulse racing as his body purged itself of the toxic dread that had overwhelmed him. Raven looked at him pitifully as he vomited. It was not like Northern had not seen a gruesome scene before. After all, that had been the first thing he saw when he entered his first rift. But this was on another whole level. All the creatures in these mountains must have died here. Northern wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His forehead was still pale as he straightened his back. I doubt that. but I don't want to think about what is going on down in the depth. It was no wonder why all the monsters were rampaging. No doubt about it, that monster must have been what did it. Northern was silent for a while. He was still turned away from the scene. He furrowed his brows and spoke, his tone tensed and a bit shaky. Raven, are you sure we can survive this monster of yours? Chapter 340. Our Mayhem Part 1. Of course he was scared, but not so driven by fear that he would lose sight of what he could do. Regardless of what they had seen, there had never been an aim to fight this thing. At least Northern thought Raven had made it clear in the way she put it. What she said they were strong enough for was to survive it, which had not even been in her calculation before now, same with entering the rift. She seriously made all those calculations from the beginning to the end and left this single one out? Northern was surprised. From the beginning of this journey, Raven had shown a terrifying control of what they were up to. From recruiting Helena to battling the Kirathon. Probably when things started changing was when Northern fell into the depths and she had to go into it with him. So, apart from that which she didn't see coming, this monster was probably the only thing Raven couldn't control in their journey. Her plan was probably to outrun it or just survive it somehow. Northern smiled. Knowing that there was this one thing Raven couldn't control brought a strange comfort to his heart. Are you seriously laughing? With the situation we are in right now? Northern looked at her, getting rid of his small smile. Can't a man chill a little? As you can see, I'm the one most affected by the reality of this situation, Northern said, glancing at his vomit.
No.
You're just a weakling. Northern said, ouch, with a straight face. Then he intoned after Raven's demeanor did not find it funny. So where do we go from here? We find Helena and Terence. Crap. Thinking about that feral woman pisses me off. I'd rather not even see her. Raven shook her head. I doubt if Terence would be here. She would have come taken what we came here for and left. Northern was silent after she spoke, but kept his gaze on her for a couple of minutes, hesitating. Finally he spoke. What is it exactly that we came here for? I know I accompanied you based on payment and do not necessarily need to pry into that information. But why come all the way here? Raven looked at him, a little trace of a smile on her face. Northern, you are my friend now and I trust you, so it's okay to ask. She paused and began to explain. First, what we are after is an item called Teardrop. Teardrop, Northern repeated after her. What is the significance of this item to surviving or leaving this desolation? Raven nodded, her expression squared. Good question, she commended and continued. The teardrop is an item that can cause flood, and I need it for the one time that we will need to leave the desolation. Northern looked at her plainly. He did not understand what she meant by the one time. You need to put more effort into that explanation. Raven looked down for a jiffy and raised her head back. When we successfully clear the rifts, we will make our way to Lewingard for ships. Most likely they won't let us in. We will force our way in and cause a large discord which we will take advantage of to steal ships that would sail to the Central Plains. Northern's mouth dropped. She continued still. Getting ships from Lewingard is harder than challenging any rifts. We don't know anything about them other than they have strong knights and their emperor is practically a beast. The flood is our key to stealing ships that would be enough to take as many people that are willing to leave this place at that time. Northern was still stunned by surprise even as she came to an end of her speech. She had thought that far ahead? Just how many calculations are in your head? He questioned internally. Raven smiled wistfully. Although, you'd probably be long gone before we do all of this. Northern turned away from her and set his gaze upon the gruesome scene again. The rotten smell choked him so much that he had to squeeze his nose together. But he did not respond to Raven. He too was glad he would be leaving soon, he was glad. What is this dissatisfaction I feel? Something was throbbing him from within. He furrowed his brows and said, So what is the way forward? I'd do anything to leave this place. Most likely Helena and Terence have left. She looked forward. There was no way to even map out where the sea of bloodshed and corpses had stopped. It seemed to spread towards the horizon. Raven turned back. "We go back." Northern observed her for a couple of heartbeats before asking her, "Are you sure? If we turn back only to find out that they are trapped in wherever they are or that they've died. And what about my ship?" Raven shook her head with a proud smile on her face. "You seem to forget that Helena is a sage. And do not understand Terence. That lady is a mystery box. You never know what to expect. Your ship is probably what they used to go back. They'll be waiting for us at the end of the mountain." Northern's eyes stayed with her for a while before he responded. "I see. You seem to trust their abilities a lot. As I do yours too." She looked into his eyes, then removed her eyes and looked at the floating pillars they have to cross. "Do not trip this time." Northern frowned. "Of course not. What do you take me for? A tripper?" Raven flew into the air and spread out her wings. Immediately Northern shot into the air also, leaving with so great a momentum that the ground beneath him shattered. He landed on the first stone pillar, causing it to shudder strongly. Now he didn't even need to time his jump because he was strong enough to leap and land as he deemed fit. He could see it clearly. "Ah! I have definitely gotten stronger." Of course, he knew he had. It was just that realizing it so vividly like this hit different. It made his belly churn with excitement. Northern leaped away from the stone and landed with a great thud on another, then leaped again. Each time he leaped and landed, the stones shook like they couldn't bear his weight and had to stagger a bit to find balance. Raven curled a corner of her lips as she watched him easily traverse the floating pillars. She was about to speed forward when a sudden darkness overwhelmed the entire landscape. The mountain was one of dark skies, but this one was far darker and ominous. It instantly caused Raven to not see anything such that she began to fall. Northern, whose chaos eyes glowed in the darkness, quickly jumped into the sky to catch her and landed on another stone pillar with ease. "What is going on? What is this darkness?" Raven's voice came out, strained. "I can't see anything." Her voice became more tensed. "Northern, I think it's our mayhem. I think it's coming." If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.